Hi, my name is George Asian and it's a great day to be alive. I have not been available for Facebook Live class in a very long time, but I'm back and I'm excited to be back because we started talking about the dynamics of communication. For those of you who followed, that should be last week or 2 weeks ago. And then we're going to continue this time to continue to look at the dynamics of communication part 2. This time, I want you to get your biro and your notepad because we're going to be listing out certain powerful concepts, certain powerful kinds or types of communication. And our goal basically is to look at them, highlight them, and then explain them. Let's start with the first very important kind of communication. And that very important kind of communication is called intrapersonal communication. The communication that happens within us. When we move around, when we are at home, when we are at workplace, before we prepare for any particular thing, we talk to ourselves. Do you talk to yourself? Yes, you do talk to yourself. And that form of communication is called intrapersonal communication. The truth is that the quality of your life will be largely dependent on the quality of your intrapersonal communication. And I want you to learn to speak to yourself in such a way that it empowers you, that it moves you forward, that it makes you take quality decisions. Intrapersonal communication is very important, especially if you are into public speaking and you want to overcome stage fright. If you are trying to overcome stage fright, you need to get that in place. You need to know what to say right to yourself so that you can motivate and inspire yourself enough to take action. So the first thing I want you to write down your note is intrapersonal communication, the communication that happens on your inside, and it is so very important. People don't know how to talk to themselves. People don't know how to talk to themselves. We have a few techniques that we teach people that before you climb the stage to speak, you can say to yourself, and then you trigger up the emotions, you trigger up the excitement required to deliver a top-notch speech. So intrapersonal communication is very important, and I have said it earlier that the quality of your life, yes, is dependent largely on how you talk to yourself. There is a concept we call reframing. And reframing can be done to others. You can reframe people's thoughts. You can shape their perspective or literally shift their perspective. And you can also reframe yourself. You can reason with yourself. You can talk to yourself. You can talk yourself into something. All right. And it's something you need to learn to do, to learn to reframe yourself so that you can take quality actions that have success consequences. And for speaking and for speakers, you need to be able to do that for yourself, especially when you're climbing up on stage. The second kind of communication that is so important, and it's a kind of communication, we call it interpersonal communication. The first one is intra, the next one is interpersonal communication. And if you're taking down notes, I'd like you to write that down too. Interpersonal communication is that communication that occurs between one or two persons. You're having a conversation with somebody, and for counselors, for life coaches, for people who are involved in therapy, this skill is very important. There are people who are very, very, very good on one-on-one. They can talk to you. They can talk you out of any situation. It doesn't matter the mess that you're in. It doesn't matter the challenge you're facing. If they can sell you on anything, just on a one-on-one. But put them on the stage to speak to a crowd of people, and then they would not be able to do as good as when they're having a conversation with you one-on-one. Is that your situation? Well, while that is a major issue for people, they want to see how they can transition from one-on-one to a crowd. It's important to realize that interpersonal communication is a skill. It's a skill that you ought to develop for your relationships, for your relationship with your wife, relationship with your people. If you're into life coaching, you also need to understand how to work with people. 2013, I took a course, and that course was a life coaching course. And that course was very extensive, about 14 hours of intensive training on how to work with people one-on-one, how to literally, radically change a person's life by having one-on-one engagement. And that course truly helped me. And so it's a skill. Interpersonal communication is a skill. If you're in the workplace, if you're a career person, if you are in a business place where you have people, knowing how to work with people to establish rapport and develop relationship with people is critical to your success as in that form of communication. Interpersonal communication is also a kind of communication. Now there was another kind of communication, and that kind of communication is called non-verbal communication. Now non-verbal communication is, of course, as the name implies, a kind of communication that happens without you necessarily saying anything. I mean, you still get to make the impact you have to make without you saying anything. For those of you who have been my students, who have followed me, we say that when you are having a conversation with a person or a group of people, the impact you have on those persons can be categorized into three. The first one is the body language that you have, and the body language constitute 55% of the impact you make on any person that you're speaking to or a group of persons. The next thing is your tonality, the tone or your vocal variety, or your what we call your inflection or your prosody constitutes 38%, and interestingly your words only constitute 7%. So your body language and your vocal variety or your tonality constitute a bulk of the influence and the impact you have on people. And your body language or your tonality is actually non-verbal. It's non-verbal. So you want to pay attention to non-verbal cues and clues when you speak with people, when you have conversations with people. And when we talk about non-verbal communication, we're looking at dance, we're looking at demonstrations, we're looking at using icebreakers, we're looking at using props. And it's a skill. Knowing that your vocal variety and your body language constitutes higher percentage of influence, you want to spend time developing non-verbal skills, and this is vital. Okay, let's move on to another kind of communication. So we looked at three now. We've looked at intrapersonal communication, we've looked at interpersonal communication, and we're looking at non-verbal communication. Now let's go to another kind of communication that is important. And communication is a kind of communication, a subject that is relevant is called corporate communication. Now, this kind of communication is common in the corporate circles, in organizations, even in government parastatals. Any organization that has hierarchy, that has an organogram, needs to understand these dynamics, needs to understand the mechanics and the dynamics of corporate communication, how communication flows from hierarchy, from one person to another. And when you don't understand this, you would have issues. So if you're working in a corporate organization, whether in the middle level or higher level, you need to be particular about the kind of how communication operates, how you relay information to your boss, and so on and so forth. So it's a kind of communication, and it's vital. You must understand how that works to work in the corporate circle. Now we'll move on to another kind of communication, and that kind of communication is called marketing communication. Marketing communication. Now this kind of communication is what happens, I hope you're writing that down. This kind of communication is what happens in the marketplace among businessmen, and for people who are pitching to get funds from investors. This kind of communication is important. For people who are selling products or services to customers, this kind of communication is important. For people who are rallying people to buy into a subject, buy into a service, buy into a concept, buy into a philosophy, this kind of communication is important. And marketing communication is so great, so huge, so vast that it will take you a while to understand it. We have marketing communication. And then we also be marketing communication. We have another kind of communication that is called brand communication. What do we mean by brand communication? Brand communication simply talks about the way brands, mega brands, and even small brands communicate their essence, communicate their core values, communicate their marketing trust and drive, their philosophies to customers. And this is a very important subject. I've been, there was a time in 2014 I studied around the subject of branding, and it took me to a lot of places. I met a lot of people. I understood that we have laws of branding, and when we say branding, what comes to mind? Branding are those features, those colors, those distinguishing, those benefits, that essence, that logo, that slogan that separates a product, an individual, or a service from others. That's what makes you unique. I often say is not your similarity. What makes you unique is your difference. So your brand is your difference, your uniqueness. What sets you aside from the entire lot. So when people get to a particular spot, what makes them know that this is you? And so you need to start thinking in terms of branding. Now, if you're a business person, you're an entrepreneur, you want to think in terms of how do I brand my concept, how do I brand my product, how do I brand myself, because you're a brand. There's such a concept as personal branding. And beyond doing personal branding, you want to start effectively communicating that brand to people, so people can perceive you the way you want them to perceive. So brand communication is broad and it's massive. For example, look at colors. There's so much significance in colors. People identify with colors. Organizations identify with one or two colors. Some identify prominently with one particular color. Some identify with shades of colors. And colors matter. They have a language, they have a psychology, and they determine a perception, a psychological perception that people have of you and of your product and of your service. So brand communication is important, and sometimes for a speaker it comes in very handy, especially when we're discussing the business of public speaking. We have to also talk about branding as a very major part of the things you need to put in place. Now, when we talk about green, for example, in Nigeria, if you're looking at lemon green, what organization comes to your mind? Of course, the organization that comes to your mind quickly is Glow. Glow has been able to communicate their brand somehow through that color. When you look at yellow, what comes to your mind? MTN comes to your mind. When you look at red, maybe Zenebank or maybe Airtel comes to your mind. When you look at Hunter Green or Forest Green, what comes to your mind? Of course, you're thinking of Etisalat comes to your mind, or Nine Mobile, now Nine Mobile. When you think of blue, what comes to your mind? What organization communicates through the color blue? You're thinking of many organizations like First Bank. You're looking at Facebook. You're looking at Samsung. You're looking at Panasonic. You're looking at there are different colors, different organizations that identify with blue. And because blue is a business color universally, they now start working with different shades of blue. Like Union Bank has sky blue as its own shade of blue. So they have different shades of blue. And because blue is also a business color, IBM is also blue. Samsung is also blue. They now distinguish themselves by using certain fonts. So fonts also is a communication method, a communication strategy to separate themselves from others. So brand communication is important. Some of them go as far as using their logo anywhere you go. That's for MTN, for Zenebank, in your best interest. So they use their slangs, their slogans, their logo, their fonts, their colors, to literally set themselves aside to distinguish themselves. So brand communication is the way organizations communicate. Remember, we're talking about dynamics of communication, the way they communicate their message to people. So we've talked about a few kinds. We've talked about intra. Intra is about how you communicate with yourself, and that's significant because if you don't communicate with yourself effectively, if you don't have personal persuasion, you won't be able to effectively communicate with others. We've talked about interpersonal communication, the way you relate to people and communicate effectively with them. Is also a skill that you need to develop. We've talked about non-verbal communication as constituting a lot of impact even in your verbal communication, like your tonality and your body language. They constitute non-verbal communication. We've talked about marketing. Also, we've talked about corporate communication, the conversation and the communication that goes around in any organization. We talked about marketing, communication, and now we're talking about brand communication, which we'll just spend some time to look at. Now, another kind of communication that is vital is called what we call the internet communication. Pretty much what I'm doing right now is a form of the internet communication is driven by written words, and now by audio, and now also by visual. So people are learning how to interact with a large number of people virtually, using platforms like Facebook, using platforms like YouTube, Instagram, Zoom, StreamYard, and many other softwares. So you need to understand that the way to go about communicating that is quite different. Now, I have some experience with television. I did television for 9 years, and I have some experience with radio. I did it for a couple of years. But and the dynamics is quite different. And I'm going to talk about that shortly. But the internet, because I had that experience, I thought that coming to the internet, I would easily just begin to flow. But you see, it doesn't always work the same way. So there's an internet language, there's a way that people on the other side who watch you on Facebook, who watch you on Instagram, wants to be communicated to. And you need to understand those dynamics, you need to understand it and relate accordingly. So there's something called internet communication. And it uses all modes of impressions. It uses the audio, it uses the visual, and yes, audio visual, and that is very, very strong. So the internet communication is a kind of communication. Now, the last kind of communication I'll talk about today is the mass communication. Now, mass communication is a study, it's a communication model that helps people to reach out to a large number of people, through a medium. You're looking at television. Television made so much impact. In the 1940s down to 1950s, television was strong, very, very strong, and it was used as mass media for some people, for propaganda, for some other people to promote ideals, philosophies, and even to push products. And then there was television, there was also radio. Radio is still very effective today. In some areas around the world, radio is still very effective, and that's a form of mass communication. If you go to our university, you hear things like, I'm studying mass comm. In some other universities, like in the state I am in, they don't call it mass comm, they call it communication arts. So the way you relate on radio is quite different. The dynamics is different. For example, you don't say things like hi viewers. You rather use the word hi viewer. You don't say things like hi, hello listeners. You say hello listener because it is assumed that you are speaking to just one person. You're speaking to just one person. So this is so good to know. And people go to study to understand how it works. So we've looked at this kind of communication, and the idea basically is to help you understand that communication is life, and the effectiveness of your life will be traceable to the effectiveness of your communication. And whatever kind of communication you choose to adopt to spread your message or to make impact, you need to know and understand it very well. So if, for example, you have an organization, you need to understand the dynamics of branding. And if you don't understand branding, there's just as much impact you can make. You need to understand how to communicate your core values, your philosophies, and your essence, and to keep communicating that. Life is about, you have to repeatedly communicate your brand essence for you to make impact and for you to be distinguished. Remember what I said, that branding are those features, those logos, those qualities, that color, that slogan, that font that separates you from every other person, from every other unit, from whatever organization. Brand communication is vital. Then if you are running an organization, maybe you work with an NGO, or you are in a corporate organization or in the government, you need to understand the hierarchy, communication hierarchy. You need to understand how message is passed from one person to another. This is so vital. This is so important in communication. And then we talked about intra, being that you need to know how to take charge of yourself. We've had a lot of challenges this year. This year has been a tough year for people, but for some other people, in spite of the challenges, they are able to look within themselves, find courage, reason with themselves properly, reframe themselves, and drive on effectively. So the different kinds of communications what we looked at today, and I'm sure that you got value. I'm sure that you took down notes, and that you can go over them and look at them and see how you can use them. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'd like you to click on the subscribe button so that every time we have new videos such as this, you can get information. You can also want to click on the notification so that you can be announced, and it can be announced to you whenever we have a new video. If you're watching on Facebook, it's important that you invite your friends to be part of Public Speaking School online, and we'll be glad to share. And if you want to reach out to me, you can simply send me a message on a WhatsApp message via the number +234 8187 133 153. Again, it's +234 8187 133 153. What I'm going to do is I'm going to write it somewhere around when I'm done, so you can reach out to me via WhatsApp, and then we'll tell you how to move your life forward. God bless you, and do have a great Thursday.